Tonight from the prophet Jeremiah, we hear the line, "You duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped." Many saints, and many great saints, and saints who have written a lot about prayer and the spiritual life, have written and reflected on that particular passage from the prophet. "You duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped." I think it's important, I'm not a big person in terms of, hey, the translation of the Bible, this word or that word, but I think it is important in this particular case just to recognize. I think sometimes when we hear the word duped, we might associate that with like a prank or like a clown, squirting someone with a flour and water, like, oh, I got duped into this thing, and it doesn't necessarily convey, I think, depending on the situation, doesn't necessarily convey, I don't think, what's going on here. Other words and other translations of the Bible would also refer to that as "you tricked me, O Lord," or "you deceived me, O Lord," or "you lied to me, O Lord." And I think that those convey the reason that so many saints have reflected on that particular passage from Jeremiah. You lied to me, God. You tricked me. You deceived me. That conveys, I think, the proper tone that the prophet Jeremiah is crying out here. He's very upset, and he's basically reached this moment of almost a psychological break where he's almost just given up and gone crazy. You have completely tricked me. You've abandoned me. Everything that I got into this for, you have let me down. And Jeremiah is a prophet, of course, and the prophets were called to go to the kings and go to the people and bring them things that they didn't want to hear all the time. The kings and the people did not want to hear the message of God quite often in the Old Testament. They didn't like the prophets, and oftentimes being a prophet brought with it a lot of pain and suffering. Sometimes they had to hide. Sometimes they were imprisoned. Sometimes they were beaten. Sometimes they were ran out of town. It wasn't a glamorous life that these prophets, especially prophets in the Old Testament, had to live. And so here we see the prophet Jeremiah reaching a breaking point. He's being persecuted by the people that are around him, the people that he's been sent to care for, to bring the message of God to, and they're rebelling, and they are making his life very, very, very miserable. And so he's crying out, like, God, like, you asked me to do this, and now I'm doing what you're asking, and my life is miserable. It's hellish. You have completely tricked me. You have let me down. And so that is the reason I think that many saints write about it, because we've all been there. Or most of us, hopefully, we've all been there. Husbands have probably said at some point, Lord, you tricked me into marrying this person. Wives, the same thing, obviously. You tricked me into marrying this guy. You let me down. You told me, you led me to this person, but now you're not keeping your end of the bargain. This person is a brute. Or this person is mean, conniving. Not the person that I got married to. Priests cry out at times, so I've been told. You tricked me, Lord. You promised me that this was the vocation that I was supposed to fulfill, and that this was where you were leading me to. And this is not going as it's been planned. You tricked me. You lied to me. You led me down. College students heading off to school. You tricked me, Lord. You abandoned me. You told me that this would be great, and it's not. People looking for their first job. You tricked me into this thing, this move, this career, this life, this vocation, this marriage, whatever it might be. You tricked me. Young people, teenagers, people in school deciding to try to stand up in some small way for their faith and being completely mocked and ridiculed for it. Crying out probably at times, Lord, you tricked me. You let me down. And the people that are right now sitting in Iraqi and Syrian jails and other jails around the world waiting to be put to death for their faith probably are crying out as well, Lord, you tricked me. I didn't get into it for this. A couple of comments about this cry that Jeremiah gives and that we've all given to, or at least we probably have given. First of all, it presupposes that you've trusted God first in something. That you took a chance on God, on God's call to you, on God. You took something to prayer, you discerned something really big in your life, and you took it to God and you laid it at His feet and you said, Lord, guide me. Marriage, career, vocation, whether or not I'm going to actually live my faith, whatever it might be. It presupposes that. Because if you've not taken anything to God, if you've not trusted in God in anything, then there's no way that He could let you down. There's no way that you would then cry out to God, you've deceived me, you've tricked me, you've lied to me, because you haven't asked Him for any guidance. So the cry that the prophet Jeremiah makes is a cry of somebody who has tried to ask God for help, who has asked God for guidance and wisdom in how to proceed in life. So if you haven't made that cry, if you haven't asked God, you let me down, then maybe you haven't asked God for help in the first place. Now, the important thing, though, moving on from that, how does God answer the question? How does God answer our cry? Lord, you tricked me, you let me down, you deceived me. I'm at my end of my rope. And He answers in the gospel today, pick up your cross and deny yourself. Pick up your cross and deny yourself. That's His answer. You've tricked me, you've let me down, you've deceived me, and He says, pick up your cross and deny yourself. Now, that is easy to say if you're in a lab or you're offering some advice as people are feeding you grapes and you're ruling from on high as a king or a lawgiver, or you're some sort of, spiritual lab technician. Oh, well, here's what you do. Here's the advice for your cry out to God. Just deny yourself and pick up your cross. It wouldn't have a whole lot of credibility if God was answering that from the clouds. If He just said, oh, well, shake it off, pick up your cross and keep going, we would still be mad at God. We would say, that doesn't help. I'm still mad at you. You've tricked me. You've deceived me. But the gospel answer, pick up your cross and deny yourself, as Pope John Paul II said, God does not answer our cries from above. He answers from the cross. He answers from the cross. He has done it first. He has picked up His cross and denied Himself. And He cried out too, my God, why have you abandoned me? Jesus makes the same cry that Jeremiah makes in today's first reading. He makes it from the cross too. He felt abandoned in that moment. And He makes that same cry. So the God that answers us is not answering as some distant, cold, removed, sage prophet. He's saying, I hear your question. I hear that you're upset. I understand that you think that I've lied to you, that I've let you down, that I've tricked you, that I've deceived you. But I'm answering you from the cross. Trust me. Keep going. Don't stop now. I have not lied to you. I have not deceived you. I have not tricked you. This was not some game that I played with you, that I just decided to be cruel and make you do something that I didn't want you to do or that you didn't want to do. So when we cry out to God with these questions, it's okay. God can handle that, first of all. He's not mad at us for fighting back. He's not mad at us for being mad at Him. He can handle it. But then it's also important to realize that he's encouraging us on in telling us to pick up our cross and keep going. And again, it's also important to look at the crucifix and remind ourselves that that's where he answers from. He knows. He's not giving out advice that he didn't put into practice himself. And the beautiful thing then finally I think that we take away from Christ hanging on the cross, crying out, and the prophet Jeremiah, is that even as he's asking the question, why have you abandoned me? Why you duped me, O Lord? He says and admits that even in the moment that he's asking that, he knows that God loves him. He says there's a fire inside of his being, inside of his body. And he knows even while he's yelling at God and accusing God of tricking him and deceiving him, he knows that he's loved by God and that God is really present. May we understand that God is okay with our questions, okay with our doubts, okay with our crying out to him. But may we also always never forget where it is that he answers us from. He answers us as a fellow traveler on the road of life. And his encouragement to us is to pick up our cross and deny ourselves and keep going, trusting that someday we'll understand that he was not lying, he was not deceiving, he was not tricking us. May we have the strength to heed his advice, to pick up our cross, and to keep going.